Most dogs bark when they're scared. Some bark when they're excited. But Vin Diesel's dog, he did something no one in that hospital had ever seen. He refused to move. He padded into the pediatric ward, curled himself around a sleeping little girl he'd never met, and wouldn't let a single doctor touch her. Nurses tried coaxing, security tried pulling. Nothing worked. And when Vin arrived, eyes wide, breath tight, staring at his gentle giant frozen beside the child, the dog finally looked up and revealed something that made every doctor in the room step back in shock. Before we continue, thank you for being here with us. Truly, if this story has touched you so far, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications. Your support helps us keep bringing these emotional, powerful stories to life. We appreciate you more than you know. Hospitals always smell the same: antiseptic, metal, and something faintly sad. Vin Diesel had never liked them, not because he feared doctors or needles, but because hospitals were where people waited, and waiting meant being helpless. And Vin Diesel, the man who'd survived fires, storms, and more life disasters than he could count, did not do helpless well. Tonight, though, he wasn't the one in danger. It was the little girl. 8 years old, blonde hair pale as paper, and lying unconscious in the bed in front of him. Vin stood outside room 214, his hands clenched so tight that the knuckles were white. He stared through the window at the little figure under the blankets, the tiny chest rising and falling with shallow, uneven breaths. But the strangest part wasn't the machines humming, or the nurses whispering, or the doctors checking the monitors. It was the dog. A large German shepherd, Ranger, lay curled beside the girl, his body pressed gently against hers, his head resting protectively near her hand. His chest rose and fell slowly, ears flicking every now and then at the sounds outside the room, but he never once moved from the girl's side. He had refused. For 7 hours. The hospital staff had tried everything. Treats, commands, gentle nudges. But Ranger had growled, whined, and pushed himself more firmly against the sleeping child each time anyone tried to move him. And now the staff stood several feet away, whispering nervously. Dogs usually listen to their handlers, one nurse muttered. But he's acting like she's his pup or something, another whispered. Vin Diesel finally stepped into the room. The nurses watched him like he was walking into fire. He wasn't her father. He wasn't her uncle. He wasn't even related by blood. But he loved her all the same. He had known her since she was 4, back when her mother worked as a cleaner at the security firm where Vin trained canine units. The little girl often wandered into the dog yard after school, holding crayons and drawing the dogs like they were superheroes. Ranger had chosen her the way some dogs choose a person. And she had chosen him back. Even now, unconscious and covered in small scratches from the accident, the girl's tiny fingers were curled weakly into Ranger's fur. Vin approached them slowly. The dog opened his eyes and lifted his head, watching Vin with intense, silent intelligence. Not hostility, not fear. Something else. Vin knelt down beside the bed and put a hand on Ranger's back. The dog didn't move. "Good boy," he whispered, voice rough. "I know you're scared." Ranger lowered his head again, gently nudging the girl's hand with his nose. Vin swallowed hard. He hated how his voice shook when he spoke again. "She's going to be okay," he whispered. "She's strong." A lie. He didn't know that. Nobody did. The doctors had said the same things they always say. "We're doing everything we can. We have to wait. The swelling needs time to go down." Words that meant nothing when you were watching a child fight for breath. Vin gently brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. A bruise darkened her cheek, and her lips were pale. He had arrived at the hospital 2 hours after the accident, after the frantic call from her mother, after the ambulance, after the chaos. None of it made sense. The girl had simply been walking her bike home from school when she collapsed on the sidewalk. No witnesses. No warning signs. No reason. Just a sudden fall. A head injury from hitting the ground. And then unconsciousness. But Vin couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, Something wasn't adding up. He knew this child. She didn't get dizzy. She didn't faint. And the bruise on her temple, round, sharp-edged, didn't look like she fell on the sidewalk. And Ranger was acting strange, protective, yes, but also alert, tense, as if waiting for something dangerous to return. Vin stood again and stepped back, watching the dog's posture, the angle of his ears, the way he positioned himself slightly between the girl and the door. He was guarding her. From what? A soft gasp at the doorway made Vin turn. Two nurses stood there, eyes wide, whispering. He still won't let anyone touch her. It's like he's glued to her. I've never seen a dog behave like this. Should we call security? Vin shook his head firmly. No, he's trained. He won't hurt anyone. A moment of silence. But he knows something, Vin added quietly. The nurses exchanged a nervous look. The brunette nurse finally asked, knows what? Vin didn't answer. He wasn't sure yet. He only knew that Ranger was never wrong. Not once in the 5 years Vin had trained him. Not during searches. Not during rescues. Not when detecting fear, danger, or lies. If Ranger refused to move, it meant something was still very, very wrong. Vin turned back toward the girl. The room hummed around him. IV drips, monitors beeping, the soft whoosh of the ventilator. And then, the dog lifted his head sharply. Ears pricked forward. Body tensing. A low rumble vibrated in Ranger's throat. Vin froze. What is it, boy? Ranger didn't look at the girl. Didn't look at Vin. He looked at the doorway. Vin's gaze shot up, and he saw 2 police officers walking down the hallway. The nurses noticed too. Oh good, one said. Maybe they can help us move the dog. But Vin's stomach dropped. Because Ranger wasn't watching the dog handlers. He was watching the officers themselves. Growling softly. Hackles rising. As if the threat wasn't near the officers. But was the officers? Vin stepped toward the doorway, intercepting them before they reached room 214. The dog's growl deepened behind him. One of the officers, a broad-shouldered man with a tight jaw, gave Vin an annoyed look. Sir, can you step aside? We need to speak with the child's mother. She's not here right now, Vin said calmly, and the girl's unconscious. What do you need? Routine questions, the second officer said. We were told a child collapsed on the street. That's not a normal situation. Ranger growled louder. The officers both turned slightly toward the sound. Is that dog okay? The first officer asked. No, Vin said slowly, watching their reactions carefully. He's not. The men exchanged a glance. Uneasiness flickered across their expressions. Look, the taller officer said, forcing a polite tone. We just need to see the girl. No. Vin didn't raise his voice, didn't swear, didn't threaten. But he didn't move from the door. The officers blinked. It's procedure, the shorter one insisted. You can talk to her mother, Vin said simply, not the kid. The officers stiffened. And why is that? The tall one asked. Vin stared at them, long and unblinking. Because Ranger didn't growl at innocent people. Because the bruise on the girl's head wasn't shaped like pavement. Because the officers showed up far too quickly and far too quietly for a simple fainting incident. And because the girl had whispered earlier, just before she blacked out, just before the ambulance rolled away, a single broken phrase Vin couldn't forget. The man with the badge pushed me. Vin's voice was calm but like steel. You two can leave now. Silence. Then the tall officer's lips tightened. Sir, we can come in by force if nieces. A snarl erupted behind Vin. Ranger was on his feet, teeth bared, fur standing up like a lion ready to charge. The nurses gasped. People in the hallway turned. The officers instinctively stepped back. Sir, the shorter one snapped, control your animal. Vin spoke without looking back. He's not the one you need to worry about. The taller officer's hand twitched near his belt. Vin stepped forward. Reach for it, he said quietly, and you won't make it past this hallway. A moment of terrifying stillness followed. Vin Diesel wasn't yelling. Wasn't threatening. But something in his tone, his posture, his eyes made the officers hesitate. Then, realizing all the eyes on them, they exchanged one more glance. "We'll come back later," the tall one muttered. They turned and walked away, too quickly for men with nothing to hide. Only when they were gone did Ranger stop growling. Vin slowly shut the door and locked it. Then he knelt beside the dog, pressing his forehead gently to Ranger's. "Good boy," he whispered, "tell me what happened." Ranger licked the girl's hand, then stared at the door, ears pinned back. Vin's stomach clenched. Something was very, very wrong. And he knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened the night this child collapsed wasn't an accident. It wasn't over. And Ranger had just told him, without a single word, that the people responsible were closer than anyone realized. Closer and coming back. The hospital room went quiet again, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt aware, like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. Vin stayed kneeling beside Ranger for a long moment, breathing slowly, grounding himself. His hand rested on the dog's neck, feeling the tension vibrating through every muscle. Ranger wasn't calming down. He was holding himself together. Barely. Vin finally stood and walked over to the window. He looked down into the parking lot 3 floors below. A police cruiser sat there, engine running. The officers hadn't left the hospital grounds. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't scared either. Just angry. Not the loud, explosive kind of anger, the quiet kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that made your pulse slow instead of speed up. Behind him, Ranger lifted his head suddenly. His ears shot upward. Vin turned just as the little girl, Emily, shifted under the blankets. Her eyelids fluttered. Her fingers twitched against Ranger's fur. Then her voice, thin, cracked, barely a whisper, escaped. "Our Ranger." Vin was at her bedside in 2 steps. "Hey," he said gently, brushing her hair off her face. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm right here." Her lips trembled. "My head hurts." "I know," Vin whispered. "You're safe now, take it slow." Emily blinked up at him, her eyes glassy with pain and confusion. She reached for his hand, small and trembling. "You came." "Of course I came." She swallowed hard. "Mom." "On her way," Vin said. "Traffic was bad." Emily winced, a tear sliding down her cheek. The machines beside her beeped nervously. Ranger shifted closer, nudging her ribs, whining softly. Emily rested her hand on his head. But her eyes drifted past Vin, toward the hallway. And suddenly, she froze. Her pupils shrank. Her breathing quickened. Vin immediately leaned closer. "Emily, Emily, what is it?" Her small voice was barely audible. "They're here." Vin followed her gaze instinctively. But the hallway looked empty. "Who's here?" he asked softly. Emily swallowed, her lips shaking. The man with the badge." Vin's jaw locked. His heart dropped. "Emily," he said quietly, "did someone push you before you fell? You can tell me. I won't let anyone hurt you." Her chin trembled violently. "Then?" She nodded. "Just once." Vin inhaled sharply. His pulse spiked, but his expression didn't change. He didn't want to scare her. "Okay," he whispered. "Good job, you're safe now. I'm here, Ranger's here." Ranger pressed closer against her chest protectively. Emily's breathing steadied a little. But Vin's mind was racing. The bruise, the fear, the dog's reaction, the officers. It all connected now. Someone had harmed this child. And that someone was inside this hospital. Vin stood slowly, turning toward the door. Just as the nurses rushed back inside. "Sir," the brunette nurse said breathlessly, "you need to know those officers you spoke to. They said they're authorized to question the girl immediately. They said they're coming back up now." Vin didn't even blink. "Did they show you paperwork?" he asked calmly. The nurse hesitated. "Well, no, they just said." "Then they're not talking to her," Vin said. The darker-skinned nurse shifted nervously. "They sounded upset, Mr. Diesel." "Let them be upset," he said. A loud clang echoed down the hallway, something slamming into something else. The nurses jumped. Ranger shot to his feet, growling sharply, fur bristling. Vin's head snapped toward the door. Then they heard voices. Male voices. Raised, angry. Boots approaching. Fast. Both of you, Vin said to the nurses, step back from the bed. They obeyed immediately. Emily whimpered, clinging tighter to Ranger's fur. The dog didn't move, didn't break eye contact with the door. Vin positioned himself between the bed and the entrance. One man, no weapon, but with a presence that could have stopped a hurricane. Seconds later, the door burst open. The same two officers stormed in, faces flushed, breathing hard. The tall one barked. Step aside, sir, last warning. Vin didn't move. Ranger growled so violently, the floor seemed to vibrate beneath him. You're not questioning her, Vin said. This is police business, the shorter officer snapped. Now get out of the way. If you have orders, Vin said evenly, show them. We don't need. Yes, Vin said, voice dropping an octave, you do. The officers exchanged a look. Then, the tall one reached for his belt. Ranger lunged, but stopped when Vin raised a hand without breaking eye contact with the officers. Emily, Vin said quietly without turning, keep your eyes on Ranger, okay? Don't look over here. She nodded against the dog's neck, shaking. Vin took one step forward. Tell me why you're really here. The tall officer smirked. Like we said, routine. The kid fainted, we. No, Vin interrupted, the truth. The shorter officer's jaw tightened. She knows something, he snapped. She was near something she shouldn't have seen. Vin's eyes narrowed. What did she see? The tall officer took a slow breath. Then his fake smile dropped. All she had to do was mind her own business. Vin didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't blink. But something in his posture shifted. Barely. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Ranger's growl went silent. Not because he calmed down, but because Vin was now the threat. The tall officer stepped closer. I'm done pretending, he snarled. Move aside. Vin stepped closer too. No. Silence. Then, the shorter officer reached for Emily. That was the moment everything inside Vin snapped. He didn't yell. He didn't warn them. He didn't hesitate. He moved. Fast. The shorter officer didn't even see the hit coming. Vin grabbed his wrist, twisted hard, shoved him face first into the wall, and pinned him with one arm across his neck. The tall officer lunged forward, shouting, You're assaulting an officer. Vin's voice was low and lethal. You stop being officers the second you put your hands on a child. The tall officer swung. Vin blocked it, slammed his fist into the officer's ribs, and kicked his leg out from under him in one smooth, devastating motion. The man hit the floor with a choked cry. The nurses screamed and backed into the corner. Emily cried harder, burying her face in Ranger's fur. Ranger stood guard over her, teeth bared, waiting for Vin's cue. Vin leaned close to the pinned officer's ear. Tell me, he growled, what did you do to her? The man trembled. She saw us, he stammered. We were questioning someone behind her school she saw, so we tried to stop her. Tried to stop her how? The officer's voice cracked. She ran, we caught up, just wanted to scare her, didn't think she'd fall. Vin's fist slammed into the wall beside the man's head. He didn't hit him. He could have. But he didn't. Instead, he forced the man's arm behind his back, so hard the guy screamed. The tall officer tried to stand. But Ranger lunged forward with a bark so thunderous the man froze mid-movement, eyes wide. Vin stared the two men down, breathing hard but controlled. You assaulted a child, he said. Then you came here to finish the job, to silence her. The shorter officer shook violently. You don't understand. No, Vin said, I understand perfectly. He yanked the man upright and shoved him toward the nurses. Call security, Vin ordered, now. They scrambled for the phone. The tall officer tried to crawl toward the door. But Ranger blocked his path, snarling inches from the man's face. Vin stood between the officers and the hospital bed like an iron wall. "You'll answer for what you did," he said. But we're police," the tall one sputtered. Vin leaned forward, eyes dark. "Not anymore." Security arrived seconds later. And then the real police. And then the hospital administration. Vin didn't leave Emily's side once. He watched the corrupt officers get handcuffed and dragged away, shouting desperately, blaming each other. He didn't feel satisfaction. Just relief. Exhausted, bone-deep relief. When everything finally quieted, Emily tugged weakly on Vin's sleeve. He sat beside her immediately. She looked up at him with swollen eyes. "Are they gone?" "Yes," Vin whispered, "and they won't hurt you again." Emily let out a tiny breath of relief. And for the first time in 8 hours. She smiled. It was small, weak, but real. Ranger rested his head beside her, licking her hand gently. Vin brushed her hair back. "You did so well," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." Emily's eyes fluttered. "Ranger saved me, and you." Vin shook his head. "No, sweetheart, you were brave." Tears gathered in her eyes again, but this time they weren't scared tears. Just overwhelmed ones. She reached for his hand. "Can Ranger stay?" Vin chuckled softly. He was never leaving. Emily smiled sleepily. And then, voice faint but steady, "I love you both." Vin swallowed hard, his throat tight. "We love you too." She drifted into peaceful sleep at last. Ranger curled protectively against her. Vin stayed beside them, finally letting his shoulders drop. The adrenaline faded. His hands trembled, but only for a moment. A nurse approached quietly. "Sir, what you did, you probably saved her life." Vin didn't answer. He just watched the sleeping child and the dog who never left her side. Then he whispered, "No, he did." The nurse followed his gaze to Ranger. And she nodded. Vin reached out and rested a gentle hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he whispered. "You kept your promise." Ranger closed his eyes and leaned into Vin's touch, finally at peace. For the first time since the accident, the room didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt safe. And everything that tried to hurt that little girl was gone. For good.